Good afternoon. My name is Noelle Melton. I am our Vice President of National Homeownership Programs and Lending here at NeighborWorks. And I have the honor to lead our team in our efforts around financial stability and wealth building through strategic planning and program development. And so this conversation for me is pretty critical because as we talk about the homeownership gap, as we talk about wealth building, I often imagine like a cup that we're constantly trying to create more homeowners and putting it into it to sort of level things out. But if we're not addressing the hole at the bottom, where we're losing wealth, we're watching wealth deplete to our communities and families, we're not really looking at the picture holistically. So today here, we've heard some really great stories, personal stories about what this looks like and how it plays out in families. We heard some really amazing specific strategies around Philadelphia about how to partner together. And we heard some really specific ways about how this plays out in specific communities. But we're going to take a little bit of time to talk from another angle about how philanthropy plays into property inheritance. And I think this is pretty important right now. Our philanthropic partnerships are pretty critical more than ever today. And many of you out here are practitioners and therefore grantees, right? So you have, many of you are leading successful programs or looking for funding to grow your programs, whether they're on the curative side with Tangled title or if they're on the preventative side to stop all this from happening, these numbers as we're talking about. And many of you are also funders who are looking to deepen your understanding about this, figure out how you can really focus your investment more wisely and figure out which piece you want to play in. So joining me for this conversation today is Annika Little, who is the Managing Director of Asset Funders Network. So welcome, Annika.
Thank you. And first of all, Molly, thank you. My iPhone thanks you for the storage that you just freed up because I can delete about 40 pictures, so thank you for that. I am really excited to be here today, and I want to first actually just acknowledge two of my colleagues who I see in the audience. Karama Neal, who, if any of you have met her, is really our deep expert on heirs property. I know enough to be dangerous, but if you haven't met Karama, you should meet her. And I also want to acknowledge Christy Baker in the back. And Christy is actually the colleague that brought this issue of heirs property to AFN. And I will just say that, Christy got pulled into something, as we all do, right? Like you get pulled into this meeting, you're like, why am I going to this meeting? What is this? What's it about? And it was about this topic of heirs property. And she sent it over to me and said, like, gosh, is this something we want to work on? And I've worked in housing and community development. I had like 20 years of working directly in mortgages and financial services. I had never heard of it. And so one, I was embarrassed. Two, I just thought, well, I can't be the only one, right? Like I can't be the only one who doesn't know what this thing is. And that really guided and started AFN's work into the issue of heirs property or Tangled title, foundational to, it is this really big problem that's central to equitable wealth building and economic mobility, and nobody knows anything about it. I shouldn't say nobody, right? All of you, but a lot of the people that we want to know about it don't know about it. And so that was kind of how we started it. I'll also just say quickly, for those of you who don't know Asset Funders Network, we are a national membership organization for grant makers, for philanthropy. Our members are private foundations, community foundations, financial institutions, all with a kind of common and unifying interest in advancing equitable economic mobility and wealth building. And that's what really guides our work and brings us to this conversation.
Well, this panel is a little bit more of an interview format, so I'm going to ask Annika a few questions, and if we have some time, we'll open it up to the audience for questions as well. But I have to admit, I have a little bit of a cheat sheet here of some things that I want the audience to walk away with that I'm going to review with you in case you're taking notes. So there's 3 things I really, in thinking about this, that are really critical. First is the challenge of property inheritance is it really calls for practitioners and funders to approach this solutions as an ecosystem. And shout out, I'm looking, I think where'd my people go? The Philadelphia panel, I feel like just a shout out to you because I feel like you really illustrated physically just all the different views that need to come to play in this. And really figuring out how we complement and amplify each other's existing work is so critical versus what we often do, which is come at a solution on our own, whether it's our own funding, our own thinking. And so that is one thing I want to make sure people walk away with today. Second, funders and practitioners, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can engage differently with one another to be more impactful in our solutions and how we can really approach the situation from each other's shoes. How can we think about this from a funder's perspective? How can funders think about it from a practitioner or grantee's perspective? That's going to help us build some stronger partnerships that last longer. And third, I hope you walk away with identifying somebody else who you should be talking to or an opportunity that you can engage in to take back home while you're thinking through some of your strategies or investments that you can make when you're approaching the situation. So with that in mind, can you tell me a little bit, Annika, about why AFN is really putting time and attention into this issue? Why do you view it as a critical item to focus on?
Well, I'll say, building on that, oh my gosh, more people need to know about this. I mean, it really fundamentally started with that and our own curiosity. But what we have learned, over time, and I think has really become our approach, is that we tend to investigate an issue and then try to put it into words that's helpful for our members, for philanthropy to understand and get excited about, so that grant makers can then use those tools to have conversations internally, investigate further with their partners in community, maybe use it as a cheat sheet to take it to their board, right? But that in reality, there are some foundations that are incredibly agile and they'll see a new idea and boom, they're on it. Most, it takes some time, right? We got to learn our way in, we got to figure out our strategy. And so from an AFN perspective, we wanted to be a partner and be a resource for that learning way, learning people's way in and giving people sort of a walking around document. Like, I understand what this is, I understand why this matters, and whether I'm a funder who cares about physical health, economic mobility, financial health, housing, education, there are intersections, right? This is not a one silo issue. So we wanted to do some case making of that. And that's really where our work started. And I will also say that as we thought about how could AFN play a role, right? Like, we don't want to get in the way of all the practitioners in this room doing the work. Like, we want to lift up best practices, we want to lift up solutions, but it really became clear that kind of research data and insights was a gap. I don't know, I stopped counting how many times earlier panels talked about that Pew research. Like, literally, I stopped at like 10. But it became abundantly clear that data like that was really needed to help folks center around how big is this problem, what are some of the things we could do as next steps. And so we have tended to focus our early work on really kind of helping the ecosystem writ large understand what's at stake and what are the opportunities.
Yeah. And it's a complex challenge that really cuts across multiple populations, multiple communities, but at the end of the day, it's still depleting wealth, it's still impacting families in that same way. Can you share maybe a little bit about what resonates most with the funders you engage with? Like, why do they care about this? I know what I care about this.
Yeah.
What do you see them like focusing on?
So I'm laughing at that question only because like, and it reminds me a little bit of like what Mel said, you know, of like this, there kind of are no silver bullets, right? What works for one tribal community does not work for another tribal. Like, right, I don't need to tell you, you've met one funder, you've met one funder. I will say, though, I think what, as a, you know, has resonated are actionable ideas and solutions. Has absolutely resonated. I think there have been a number of funders who have, again, sort of learned about this issue and then actively became partners of like, oh boy, we really are on a learning journey and we'd like to do and learn simultaneously so that those are not sequential but simultaneous. That idea of help me be a partner in this, but also give me some advice about what we could do that would be really relevant, has resonated. And I think the other is that I will just say, like, kind of size of funder doesn't matter. Like, I'm Ruth, I'm happy to be looking at you, and I'm looking at like Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It's a big national foundation, but you know what? Like, we heard Paige talking about TD Bank's investment this morning, and they were really strategic about how they were going to invest across their footprint. And so there are really meaningful ways to engage. The same thing goes for if you're a funder who's in, you know, just in a community or just in a neighborhood. So I think I would just say what resonates is helping all the funders kind of see their place in this work.
Oh my gosh. It's funny because there's multiple partners who've been talking about this, and I keep walking away with each panel thinking about how many people have to play together to make this happen. And the reach, with one organization, and on the flip side, if one funder tries to do this, this is a very daunting problem to solve. But from NeighborWorks' perspective, and I think from your perspective as well, we have to really approach this as a broader ecosystem, right? How can we come together to tackle this together? Otherwise, if we're not bringing those facets, like working together in collaboration, we're just playing a giant game of whack-a-mole. I mean, that's what I keep seeing when people try to address it just solo. So one of the things that comes to me is like, what opportunities do you see funders playing in that ecosystem, and why are they well positioned to do that? And I guess, you know, what's the best way for them to sort of engage on that?
I'll preface this by saying, and you guys know this, right? But the solutions are inherently local. They just are, right? And it depends on, we heard about this panel of this amazing ecosystem that's happening in Philadelphia. And then we also heard somebody ask about, well, I've got in Pittsburgh, I don't have that ecosystem happening yet, right? And the solutions you can deploy are inherently based on what are your municipal policies? What are your state policies? What does that look like? And I don't share that to say like, oh, it's really hard and it's really hopeless. What I mean to say is that it really does require, I hate to overuse this word ecosystem, right? But like, you gotta kind of, it's a team. Like, you gotta kind of have a quarterback. It means that, excuse me, it really means that I think you've gotta, you philanthropy, anybody should be thinking really creatively about who are the partners that are not our typical partners who need to be at the table. It was incredibly exciting to see the way City of Philadelphia was involved here, but let me tell you, that is not the norm around the country in other cities. It is not true that every city feels like this is their water to carry. So I think it is assembling that group of ecosystem partners. And it might be things like business owners, employers, hospitals, university systems. I think there are really opportunities to think about where are those players. Like, we're having conversations right now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We just did a local study that revealed that 50% of all tax foreclosure properties in Dallas and Fort Worth are heirs property. 50% of the tax foreclosures. And knowing that now makes us think about, okay, well then who are the levers and who are the partners we use? And there is Texas A&M Law School, happens to be in Fort Worth. They're not involved in this yet. Maybe there's a way to engage them. So I don't mean to be flip and suggest that it's really easy to assemble all of these partners. It's not. But I think it's really necessary to develop that ecosystem that is targeted and local and responsive to your community.
Yeah. What about, sometimes I think about these stages or these buckets of people. Stage sounds better. But like some people are in the thick of it, they know it, they are in Tangled title, they may not want to talk to somebody about it, but they are in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. Others don't know that this is sort of like hanging over their head, right? That they are not even aware that this is about to happen. And there are other people who this could be happening to, but maybe they're not there yet. And some of these different stages can also guide, I guess, our partnerships. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about maybe examples of how different funders have approached it within these different buckets of populations, or how we could break this up a little bit different as we approach some of this.
Yeah. So again, really different in different places, and also recognizing, right, that there's national funders who are thinking about this, and like, what's our role in the national ecosystem? I think I'm going to, Noelle, answer that in a slightly different way, but I would say a couple of things. Like, if I were a practitioner sitting in this room, I would encourage you to really, one, if you haven't started this work yet, I would not be afraid to ask for planning grants. Planning grants are awesome, right? Because I can't even tell you how many times I have started a project and I thought I knew like sort of all the things that we would do, and then you get 6 months into it and you discover all these other things. So I would really, I think heirs property, in looking at Tangled title issues, a planning grant to bring folks together, and I forget who it was on the Philly panel who talked about bringing folks together to just explore. What are you interested in? What are you interested in? Like that. All right. But it's really important, and those are the kinds of things that I think can be covered in a planning grant. And I would encourage folks in this room to not think about, to at least be asking if that's a possibility. Not all funders are going to be willing to do it, but I would ask, right? And collaboration is hard. It's hard work. We shouldn't be afraid to ask for that to be resourced. You may decide to do it anyway, but you shouldn't be afraid to ask. And I would say to funders, I do think supporting the growth of heirs proper, supporting the growth of solutions at local community level is going to require some resourcing of planning and organizing, and what does that look like? The other piece that I just want to acknowledge that's like super funky with this is solutions don't typically fit into the 12-month grant cycle, right? And so I think the way forward on that is be in conversation with your funders, and funders to be in conversation with your grantees of, let's acknowledge it, how do we solve for that together? There are, but it's a thing. They're never going to neatly fit into that 12-month cycle.
Exactly.
They're just not. And then I think, Noelle, the other piece you asked about was sort of like the different parts of like who works on what lever. I do think it's important in this work for folks to know and honor like what's their sweet spot and what's not. And it shouldn't be that an organization needs to turn themselves into a pretzel or suddenly grow a legal services arm to do this. It, hopefully solving for the Tangled title issues, solving for policy issues can be done in a cohesive way where everybody everybody knows their strength and is playing to their strength and are coordinating together. But I think ultimately whether a place needs to focus on policy or programming or legal services is going to depend on your data, your community, your needs.
And I think you talked a little bit about collaboration in that. I think Rachel on the Philadelphia panel talked about like the role of housing counselors before they got to legal aid, and I kept thinking, that's right, because you're not saying like there's a difference between where it goes from counseling to legal aid, and so we need both of those, and that means we actually have to coordinate together on like what that looks like, right? NeighborWorks with another funder is working on like developing some of our curriculum for practitioners and for housing counselors, so they understand a little bit more. They're getting that training to understand how to, anticipate these questions and how to respond to them. That's our bread and butter, right, in that wheelhouse, right? But being able to coordinate with others is pretty critical and know what their strengths are. So bringing those people together, I think, is where we think about this.
And I will just say that like the power of this network to be able to take learnings from across the country and share those and pull that together as like, here are recommendations and here are trends and here are themes that we're seeing is so important, because I keep saying this is local, this is local, this is local, but let's be honest, right? There are some system change things that we could imagine of like, what would it look like if it were actually a policy that every time a new mortgage was originated or financed, you had to designate who would inherit that property. Like we do it for our 401k and our retirement benefits. And and this is not to put, any of the big actors on the spot. It's complicated. I know it's complicated, but it's possible.
Well, I think it's helpful. You took the words out of my mouth. This is one of our strengths is being able to collect and see that broad view of all these very unique experiences across the country on a particular issue that's impacting a lot of people, and then being able to share that out. I think Marietta had talked about our partnership with TD that we have, where we're going to be launching this peer learning program with our network organizations, seasoned organizations, with ones that are learning, and being able to figure out, that works in your community, that could work in my community, and then being able to replicate that and how that is so, how it's so critical to be able to do that. I want to also go over to one of the questions or the items that we said we were going to get to earlier on is what other things should people be thinking about, practitioners be thinking about? If I'm approaching this work from a funder's perspective, is there something I should be changing or thinking about in my actions and how I engage with my funders? And on the flip side for the funders, is there something they should be thinking about to approach this work from a practitioner's perspective? You mentioned recognizing that the solution's not going to solve itself within 12 to 36 months of our grant, so there's that, just be aware. But anything else practically they can apply on this?
Yeah, I really do think, I can't emphasize enough to be in conversation with your funders. And again, and you know, as I heard Paige talk about the funding and how like TD thought about their approach. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to, you know, we're just going to make these grants. It was really hearing from community, hearing from their employees, and crafting from there. I mean, and I'm looking at Ruth, and I know Ruth is doing that, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is doing that very deeply in the communities that they are funding. So I would say, don't be afraid to really have a conversation about what are we both mutually looking to achieve, you know, beyond just what's in the box of this grant and the deliverables we're talking about. What does success look like? Things like, let's just acknowledge that visibility matters for some funders. It doesn't matter for others. So, but you should know, like, are there ways to support them and help them in that? Are there visibility needs that you might have as as a practitioner that your funder might be able to help you with? For all you know, they've got a whole comms team that would love to do nothing but social media post about your grant. If only you could feed them the right stuff, right? And then I think the other is, I wouldn't be afraid to talk to your funders about who else they work with and collaborate that could come in as partners, right? Because I promise you, not a single one of those funders works in a little silo and doesn't talk to their colleagues. They do. And so I think there is a little bit of a notion of like, sometimes philanthropy wants to own the thing, they want to name the thing, and that they don't want to partner. And I actually have seen that there is huge willingness to collaborate and coordinate because they know they can't invest in, they can't cover everything. So strategic ways to do that together, I would just say, yeah, talk to your funders about who else they know and who else they could bring to the table and convene. And like I said, earlier, maybe it's not even just a funder, another funder. Maybe it's that municipality that hasn't been at the table. Could philanthropy help with that?
That's a great point, because it also raises who else we could be talking to, who else could we be thinking about as partners to engage in this. It's not just, we often get into this bubble where we think of grantee and grantor and funder, and that is all of it. That is all it is. It makes me think about, we talked a little bit about before about how NeighborWorks is really, our bread and butter is sharing out these successful strategies and how we have each other share that out and being able to learn from one another. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call with a network organization in one city who's talking with 12 others and somebody else from another city, and they are just hanging on every word and getting into the details of how it's been impactful and being able to hear that. Just today, this conversation here, being able to share out as well. We'll also have opportunities. In August, we have our symposium in New Orleans. I am making a plug for that. At our NTI that we have coming up, we're going to be able to share on that, some more wealth building opportunities and talking more about property inheritance. And it's so critical that we're actually sharing these strategies that can be very specific, but are also just broader areas too on how we work together. So originally I was going to ask if you thought that, funders may recognize the value of that, but maybe the better question would be, how do we approach them about not just bringing the panel of practitioners together, but how do we bring together panels of funders? How do we get them all recognizing, all cover the research, or I don't know if you have examples that you wanted to share about how that may play out as well.
I'm seeing we're getting the sign from the back. I will say it is different in every case. I will say AFN we are working on that, right, of who's interested in doing what, but I will say that is something that in the places where we have place-based tables, our funders are really starting to engage in. So I'm gonna answer this with like a really lame self-serving plug for looking at some of our resources, but I mean that in that there are some resources that AFN has recently developed that although we write them for funders, we really want sort of anybody to be able to access them. We keep our website as an open architecture deliberately so that they can be, as we say in Texas, they're y'all come kind of resources. And we have got on there some kind of a basic primer on what is heirs property. We have an example of some really deep dive research that we did in North Texas, referencing that data I shared, that maybe can be an idea starter. In partnership with NCLC and Inc., worked with Karama on developing a really fabulous analysis of policy interventions and looking at the range of policy interventions that can be really impactful to address heirs property issues. And there are opportunities to take that and translate it, build on that and translate it for your state or your community. And then forthcoming, hopefully May, June, Karama is literally in final stages of finishing a report that is a prospective return on investment analysis that will, I hope for the first time, make the case of like real dollars, why does it matter to invest in this work? And so, one, keep an eye out. I hope you use them. But I think those resources can also be used by anybody in this room to take to your funders and say, hey, these are recommendations for grant makers. What do you think about that? You can use them for conversation.
And maybe build, no, and we're going to get to question. Maybe building off of some of that, we could use things like that ROI tool or some of these backgrounds to talk to our funders. I'm hearing from you that we need to figure out how to communicate more clearly with some of our funders about what their needs are and where their opportunities are to work together across practitioners, but across funders as well. So if they have some of those tools at hand, that might make that a little bit more feasible on that end. And I'm getting the stopping point to ask questions. So I want to ask questions for people here as well.
Thank you for your sharing. It's very wonderful. My name is Mavis Gregg, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of the Heirs Property Practitioner Network, which is the first network of heirs property attorneys. It's Heirs Property Practitioner Network, happen.info. We do not have a directory, so don't go there trying to find an attorney. That is forthcoming, thanks to funding.
So another resource. So you're gonna
I love that you address the need for a healthy and robust, sustainable ecosystem, and that's at the heart of the mission of the network. We're focused on cultivating attorneys. I want to borrow the word fidelity that one of our colleagues used here. Best practices, et cetera. And something that this network of 130 plus attorneys across 28 states often talk about in every one of our meetings is the capital question, particularly as it relates to the private practice. If you think about the volume of heirs property that there is, the volume of needs of heirs property owners for legal services, the ability for heirs property owners to qualify for nonprofit services, the capacity of pro bono attorneys, and the fact that we largely ignore the private practice when it comes to funding, I think that we're missing a big opportunity. And so I'm curious, Annika, in your role, do you think that we will ever achieve an openness from philanthropists to fund private practice legal services for this issue?
I don't know. I mean, I will, sorry, I didn't mean to be quiet when I said that. My quick answer is, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. So I think it's something of like, how would we do, like everything else, right? Like, how would we do case making around that? And then, you know, quite honestly, there's also the sort of you know, there's the practical of, there's some practicality of it, but we should explore it. Like, what does that look like? And I think, though, you do raise a really good point of that, like, as we think about services and supports, there is a segment of property owners that are kind of stuck in this middle of, I'm not so low income that I qualify for free, but I can't afford to do anything about it. And that's, so I will just say, I think amplifying solutions for that segment is really important. And as we talked about earlier, it's not just, it's legal solutions that also go hand in hand with the right kind of financial tools and products that I don't think exist today to support those property owners.
Thank you.
I also want to follow up on this in that I think today maybe we've talked predominantly about Tangled title from this perspective, and in my mind, we will always be chasing the issue and never capable of catching up if we're only playing that game. So a lot of times what we've talked about with Molly and her team is also, and we're not alone in this, is thinking about this in the curative way, right? So you're addressing the Tangled title and you're trying to get all of those resources together on that end, but trying to be a little bit forward thinking in the preventative, right? There's a lot of, not untapped, I don't want to say untapped, but a lot of different ways that we can coordinate efforts to stop that from happening ahead of time, right? To think about where we could be incorporating estate planning before this hits, right? And how can we normalize that? How can we leverage all of our really good practitioners on a bunch of different issues already? We've talked a little bit about offline about different unlikely allies that we could be having, right? And a couple of the panels before, I hadn't even thought about, it's on the opposite end, but leveraging like small businesses like funeral home services to tell people about this. What are we not doing on the beforehand to think about that on the preventative? And so, because if we're just thinking about the legal services on the back end, we're just playing a game of catch up forever, so.
Mm-hmm. I have the very sad task of cutting
big
big questions.
And
I'm so sorry. I can't believe I was worried that this topic wouldn't land with people and that you guys would be quiet. I know I saw several hands go up and I was like, oh, bad news for these guys. We don't have time for all of their questions right now. I do want to thank Annika and Noelle for this thought-provoking conversation.
thank you, Noelle.